They wanted Jonah remembered as a tragic footnote. She wanted his name to mean something. Accountability. What followed was less a scream for vengeance than a patient, surgical unmasking of a man who'd treated lives like ledger entries. The night Jonah died, the wind carried the smell of damp cotton and old oil, the honest sense of a town that had learned to make do. Margaret Maggie Mercer knew those smells the way some people know the lines of their own hands. She had been raised on them, had grown up threading through the ribs of the old mill with her brother, learning the tang of ledger ink and the rhythm of the looms. By the time she was 36, she had become the county's archivist and conservator, the woman who could coax a faded photograph back into a face. Practical, steady, reverent of what came before, that was Maggie. She believed in things that outlived people. The right angle of a joint, a ledger's unbroken record, townsfolk remembering to call for one another. When the mill wall gave way on a rainy Thursday in April, it took Jonah with it. The papers called it a tragic collapse. Malcolm Royce called it a very unfortunate accident. The town murmured condolences and then leaned on the developer, who promised new jobs and cleaner streets. Nobody asked why the bolts in the old scan were sheared like teeth, or why the structural survey had been stamped within the hour of his signature. Nobody asked this except Maggie. She asked with the persistence of someone who once catalogued every nail in the courthouse beams. And when she was met with closed doors, smokescreen reports, and a charity foundation check, so generous they named the hospital wing after him, anger began to stitch itself to that persistence. This is not the story of immediate fury. Maggie was practical, traditional, a woman who preferred measured steps to spectacular gestures. Her plan resembled an old clock, precise, slow, inevitable. She would find the missing pieces, the ledger lines smudged from someone's careful hand, and set them where light could find them. Revenge to Maggie was not a shout, it was a restoration. Malcolm Royce was everything the town admired and feared. Mid-50s, immaculate suits, a philanthropy portfolio that read like a love letter to civic vanity. He wore charm like a bespoke coat, a man who could make the mayor forget that the mill pump still rattled at night. Inside, Malcolm was a predator who treated rules as optional commodities, a man who believed the letter of a law could be bent for profit and that lives were collateral to balance sheets. He had a subtle cruelty, the clinical ability to smile as he rewrote history. Maggie's first injury was the coroner's report, neat, brief, with the words structural failure and a line item about pre-existing conditions that seemed to exonerate anyone who held a pen above an invoice. Her second injury was the way people started calling her persistence grief talk. The last straw was an email from the county clerk, a subtle request to let the town grieve and move forward, and a PDF attachment stamped with Malcolm's seal that inexplicably included the words non-discoverable. Across reports that had once sat in public records, she could have filed appeals, hired counsel, stood in front of press cameras and said Jonah's name until it hurt. That was the root of most anger, loud, visible, and often impotent against money and charm. Maggie refused to perform sorrow. She would instead produce evidence. Her tools were ordinary, a magnifying lamp, a knowledge of flour-stained ledgers and where contractors typically hid their mistakes, a network of archivists who owed her small favors, and a patience that had been carved into her by years of conservation, ticking down like a watch. For someone used to reviving the past, the present's decisions made for a curious challenge. She began by cross-referencing contractor invoices, the ones stamped paid that matched no bank deposit. She requested wrongfully missing blueprints from a city vault, citing her professional right to inspect historical documents. She learned the cadence of Malcolm's calendar through fundraisers and board meetings, where his guard dropped and his vanity showed. At first, it was the missing things, the blank spaces where official records should have been. Then there were the little lies, a signature that looped too slowly in a copied permit, a contractor's name repeated in invoices across several projects, payments routed through shell companies whose addresses were little more than P.O. boxes. Maggie found a ledger tucked into an old courthouse box, the original maintenance book of the Royce Mill, notarized the year her grandfather had first gone to work there. In the back, somebody had inked over a line, bolts replaced 2017. The ink bled like an old bruise when she took it to the light. Her escalation was methodical. She moved from the archives to Malcolm's world with the calmness of a conservator handling a fragile portrait, gentle, unhurried, impossible to mistake for an assault. She volunteered for the Royce Foundation's bicentennial exhibit, an act of pleasing deception. Malcolm loved the Foundation press, the philanthropic ribbon cutting, the way his portrait floated above the gala like a sainthood. If she could get inside the Foundation's records, she could plant questions where no one expected an old ledger to belong. Inside the Foundation, she was a quiet apparition, cataloging dusty donation receipts, rehousing vintage photographs, making polite, well-placed jokes about cataloging being the town's secret romance. Malcolm noticed her, as he noticed everyone who was useful. He praised her attention to detail, a phrase that became the handshake by which she entered rooms where other doors had closed. She logged the Foundation's minutes, fed them her corrections, and more importantly, placed one small digital recorder where he would never find it, beneath an oak table behind velvet drapery, a tiny insect that would not feed on charisma. Tension gathered as the town's surface smoothed over the tragedy. Malcolm launched Royce Renewal, a facade of safety upgrades and green facades. The mayor accepted another large donation. Maggie watched him stand on the steps to a new clinic and speak about progress. Each time she saw him, she felt the scrape of betrayal anew. Her methodical gathering of evidence required contact with people who had something to lose if she exposed the truth. A contractor who lived on the edge of town and loved his nephew, a county official with an ailing mother, a friend from Jonah's soccer team who had written a note to say he'd seen a missing bolt 2 weeks before the collapse. One night, as rain chased the lamp's light across her kitchen table, a photograph arrived in the mail. A grainy picture of a maintenance log signed not by the expected foreman, but by a consulting engineer who had consulted for Royce the previous summer. The name was familiar. She had seen it on other contracts. The photo had been slipped under her door. No note, no signature. Someone was helping. The town was not as alone as it seemed. The scale of what she uncovered shifted one gear further than she anticipated. The recorder in the Foundation's oak table caught Malcolm's casual talk about risk appetite and controlled write-offs. He spoke of mitigating liabilities as one would discuss trimming hedges. The clip, transcribed, read like a prayer for a man who worshipped profit. The contractor told Maggie that a bolt specification had been standardized down during budget cuts. Stronger bolts swapped for cheaper ones to keep the project on schedule. A decision passed from Malcolm to an upper manager and then cynically to the men on the floor. The men had complained. The complaints had been recorded as operational adjustments. Jonah's complaint had been forwarded in an email. That email, the email that had been marked received and then lost, sat now as an image of Maggie's proof. This is where moral conflict began to seep into Maggie's bones. She had the leverage to harm a man who would not think twice about harming in the name of a balance sheet. Expose him and he would fall, yes, but collateral would ripple. Jobs lost, a foundation shuttered, people who had leaned on Malcolm's charity forced to fend for themselves. Had Jonah's death been a cost, a sacrifice to the altar of progress? And if she destroyed the altar, what of the good it had done? Maggie felt the old mercies, the mills workers, the town's need for new hospitals, and the library's heating bill no longer ignored. This was not a black and white ledger. It was a palimpsest, overwritten by necessity, greed, and decisions that had consequences too complex for neat solutions. Doubt visited her. There were nights she considered walking away, letting Jonah be a memory without a public face, holding him like a warm thing in private, refusing to let the town make a spectacle of his name. But Jonah's last text message, clipped and cached in the contractor's phone, read, "If they don't fix the bolts, I'll show the board." He had been brave in a way that asked for no reward but truth. Maggie could not stand to let that ask die unanswered, so she planned a confrontation that married the town's love for spectacle with the sharpness of evidence. The bicentennial gala was Malcolm's night, the crown where he would cut ribbons and retire speeches into the air like a magician throwing scarves. It was also when the Royce Foundation would unveil a commemorative plaque, "In memory of our commitments." Maggie had a plan to set the record straight publicly, to show the town the documents they had been denied. The night of the gala, the town spilled into the renovated mill like moths around a lantern. Crystal glasses clinked. Journalists smiled. Malcolm glided untroubled. Maggie walked in behind him, not as a protester but as the exhibit conservator. Her hands steady, her face composed. She had obtained legal counsel, a quiet lawyer whose niece had worked with Jonah, and had copies of everything: maintenance logs, emails, invoices, and a key recording. She had arranged for one honest journalist to play the recording and display the ledger in full color across a projector screen. Her intention was not to punch Malcolm's light out with a throw of documents. She wanted the town to see the pattern, to witness how decisions had been made in boardrooms and codified as fate. When the projector clicked on, the glow threw Malcolm's jaw into sharp relief. He smiled at first, confident in his public control. Then the audio played. The room heard Malcolm speak of accepting certain failures and rolling liability into redevelopment. His words were clinical and precise, the kind of language that could not be mistaken for anything but intent. The projector flashed the invoice trail. The audience watched the dots connect. A lowered budget, a replaced bolt specification, an ignored complaint. For a moment, silence sat like a heavy lid. Then questions rose. People shouted. Someone vomited. Malcolm's face turned the color of old paper. He tried to speak, to perform his way out of it, but the clip was a cold mirror. He called security. Maggie expected that. She expected to be escorted out. Instead, the mayor, who had once accepted checks with a smile, stepped forward and asked to meet behind closed doors. The scene dissolved into chaotic clusters of hushed voices, and someone from the board, the same person who had once glanced at the logs and looked away, fled through a side door trying to telephone a lawyer. That was the town's first fracture. The climactic confrontation happened not on the mill floor but later, at the old water tower overlooking the mill, where Jonah had once gestured at the river and laughed about the idea of moving away. Malcolm found her there, no security, no cameras, just the wind and two people who shared the same night sky. "You could have done this differently," he said, hands folded like a sermon. "No," Maggie said. Her voice was not a thing meant to diffuse. It was an instrument tuned to truth. "You could have done it differently." He was not defensive in the way of a villain in a cheap novel. He was a man who believed himself necessary, who saw harm as an input cost. "I didn't kill your brother," he said quietly. "I didn't tell anyone to kill anyone. You made it possible," she replied. "You decided bolts could be cheap. You decided that cash flow mattered more than lives. You chose the ledger over the man." The words were simple. They landed with the blunt force of a hand closing a book. There was an exchange, sharp, human, not cinematic in any conventional sense. He defended the choices as economic inevitabilities, as tough calls that modern life demanded. She asked him to say Jonah's name, to give it any meaning beyond a line item. He could not. His apology was measured, unconvincing. Malcolm offered to fund scholarships, to build a safety endowment, to remove his name from things if it would help. Maggie listened. The offers were paper bandages. "Justice isn't about endowments," she said. "It's about accountability." He tilted his head, trying to pass whether she intended shame or law. "You'll ruin people," he warned. "The jobs I brought, they'll leave. Let them leave," she said. "Let them find work that doesn't live on the edge of failing bolts and good PR." What happened then was not a murder scene, nor a cinematic duel. It was a collapse of something subtler: reputation, trust, the social mortgage people pay to feel safe in an unsafe world. Malcolm's empire could not withstand the documents laid bare and the public pressure that followed. He was indicted on counts of negligence and fraud. The foundation closed pending audit, and boards resigned in a cascade of shame. The town split. Some wanted to see him hanged metaphorically for his sins. Others marched on the courthouse to demand leniency. Worried about the jobs lost when development stalled, Maggie won, in the way that legal systems can call victory: indictments, arrests, a trial that aired secrets in public. She collected that victory with the solemnity of someone who had mended a stained ledger, but found the stitches hollow. The courtroom hum was a different kind of silence, not the hush of a gallery where history is admired, but the buzz of a broken machine being explained piece by piece. The consequences of her revenge were not clean. A few workers who had kept their jobs under Malcolm's umbrella found themselves without paychecks when the company froze, and a small group shouted at Maggie for the disruption. Jonah's friends, who had once been children that watched his laugh, turned away in private. The town's bank closed an account. Donations dried up. A local teacher, who had benefited from Royce scholarships, cried that the students' summer programs would be cut. Maggie had anticipated some of this, but not the loneliness. She expected gratitude, perhaps the quiet nod of people recognizing a debt paid. So instead, she received a mixture of thanks, cold distance, and the practical fallout of economic realities. Revenge, she discovered, was not a thing that cleans a wound so much as it reveals how deep it goes. In the months that followed, she worked with the families of the mill workers to set up a cooperative fund, practical, measured, the sort of solution that suits someone who prefers to fix one bolt at a time. She restored records, handed over files to investigators, and testified in a trial that ended with Malcolm sentenced to prison and ordered to provide restitution. Jonah's name finally found its place on a town plaque that listed the workers lost, not as a footnote but as a reckoning. There was a day, a year after the collapse, when Maggie stood at the mill's threshold with a small group of children who had been part of Jonah's life. She taught them how to read a ledger, how to discern the difference between a true signature and a forgery. She did it because she believed in passing down skills that outlived grand gestures, the ability to look under the surface and see what keeps a town standing. She also did it because revenge had taught her that practical work, making, restoring, fixing, rebuilt communities more surely than a trial ever could. Did revenge fulfill her? In the legal sense, yes. The man responsible lost power and went to prison. The ledger had been corrected in the town's memory, but the emotional remuneration was partial. The ache of being Jonah's sister did not end. Maggie sometimes woke believing she had presented the perfect ledger, only to find her hands empty. In the quiet hours, she wondered if vengeance had been worth the personal cost. The friends who drifted, the brief vilification in the local paper, the nights when she replayed the water tower conversation and wondered if, somewhere, she had given him anything he deserved. Her conclusion, a practical, traditional one, was that justice and revenge are cousins, not twins. Justice seeks restoration for a community. Revenge seeks satisfaction. They may intersect, and sometimes one will necessitate the other, but their ends differ. Maggie had wanted both, and she learned to live with the gap. At the end, the town's mills stood quieter. The new clinic hummed with warmth paid for by a different fund, and a plaque read the names of those who had been lost. Maggie continued her conservation work, tending records and teaching apprentices how to find truth in paper fibers. She married neither victory nor sorrow alone. She married her craft to the memory of Jonah, and the pragmatic belief that the past, when examined with care, could teach the future to be less cruel. There is an old proverb her grandfather used to say, one she had rolled her tongue around since childhood: a town made of hands lasts longer than a town made of promises. Maggie kept that proverb like a compass. Revenge had been a necessary tool, sharp, dangerous, and ultimately useful. But the lasting work was the hands that rebuilt, the small repairs that stitched lives together again. In the winter that followed, when the snow rimed the mill's roof like a white crown, Maggie walked to Jonah's favorite bench by the river. She sat, pressed her gloved palms to the cold wood, and spoke his name softly, as if reading it aloud would both summon and release him. The river answered with its steady flow, indifferent and yet in its way consoling. She took a breath, steadied by the knowledge that she had not only avenged, but had also built something practical in the aftermath. A community fund, honest records, apprentices trained to ask the right questions. That, for Maggie, was the practical victory. Not the fall of a man who chose profit over people, but the reweaving of a town's safety net. The revenge had been necessary to force change, but it was the slow, deliberate work afterward, the hands on the ledger, the children learning to read nails and bolts and signatures, that mended the real harm. She left the bench with the winter wind in her face and a ledger tucked safely under her arm. It was an ordinary action, as ordinary as breath. It was, she thought, the most honest form of revenge, to keep living and to teach others to keep watch. If this story moved you, don't let it fade into silence. Hit subscribe, share this video, and help others hear the truth that power tried to bury. Every view, every voice keeps stories like Jonah's alive, because justice doesn't end when the credits roll. It begins when we remember.